Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Purpose Tune podcast. My name is Kong Chong, and I'm the host of this show. The goal of my show is to create valuable content to broaden your knowledge, inspire you to act, and get you in the right mindset so you can apply it in your own life to drive impact, generate meaning, and achieve your purpose. Now, I'm very excited about today's guest. His name is John Keisler. John is the CEO of Sunstone. John leads efforts to advance inclusive economic growth through strategic investment, public-private partnerships, and entrepreneurial ecosystem development. John is an experienced economic development leader with a proven track record in both the public and private sectors. Prior to joining Sunstone, John spent over 20 years in public service, including as the economic development director for the city of Long Beach. John, let's check in. How's it going today? What's going on?
Well, it's fantastic. It is St. Patrick's Day, so that's a good thing. It's a festive mood, and the weather is beautiful here in Southern California.
That's that's right. Yeah. I'm originally from Minnesota, so we are very lucky to be experiencing sunshine 365 days a year, which is great. Um, so I'd love to check in with you in terms of your background. How did you get started in this work? And maybe perhaps you could tell my listeners a bit more about what Sunstone is.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Kong. And so Sunstone, our mission is to enrich lives through investment and economic development. We have three key core values. Investment. We're investors. We believe that money is best put out into the world to build things and create value, not to save it. Number two, we're entrepreneurs and we believe in entrepreneurship. That's why we've invested almost $100 million of private capital in over 100 startups and in real estate projects that we believe create value and solve problems for communities. And then number three, we believe in community. And community for us is really why we're put here on the planet. Not only does it create meaning, on a personal level, but from a business standpoint, community is what creates great businesses because the economy is a partnership between the public and private sector.
That's beautiful. And so, of course, a lot of people in your space um, often, when they think about investing, it's more like a return of investment
Mhm.
for them, not so much with the emphasis on community. So, what ignited your passion in community? Like, let's walk us through. How did you get started in community involvement? What shaped your mindset around making impact in communities?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to be born to parents who are school teachers and parks and recreation employees for cities here in California. So I was always taught that I was put on the planet for a purpose, and that purpose was to leave things better than we found it as Keislers. So
Mhm.
the community focus was something that I benefited from as a child. I went to schools where I had teachers who were interested in shaping my mind and teaching me about music. I had soccer coaches who, trained my body and taught me how to be on a team. And I benefited from just really, really strong communities, mentors, coaches, advisors, and teachers that in my church community that ultimately showed me firsthand the value in taking
Mhm.
care of other people, and then the rewards that come from that. I think sometimes when we think about investment, as you said, we look for that ROI, that return on investment that comes maybe directly to our own bottom line or our own bank account. And sometimes we forget to also add in all those other benefits that our investments can create. There can be value to the future for our children that, someday we hope that we've left it better than we found it. There can also be other benefits from our investments that help society, the environment, or create economic opportunity for others. So from my perspective, there's a lot more to calculate when it comes to ROI.
Right. Yeah. A, in your perspective, sounds like it's more of a holistic assessment of how you can help people, not just grow in terms of from an economic standpoint, but also
Yeah.
sustainability as well too, right?
Yep.
Speaking of resilient ecosystems, like from your perspective, what does it take to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem that's not only innovative, as Sunstone has been emphasizing, but also
Mhm.
equitable and sustainable?
Yeah. So I'll go back to those three core values, investment, entrepreneurship, and community. And
Mhm.
I think that it takes those all three of those things to build a really strong economic cluster or a dense ecosystem of entrepreneurs who are successfully, not just building solutions and growing their companies, but I think that investment, you've got to have capital present. You've got to have usually people who have either been successful or government putting grants for research and development to invest in emerging industries. Usually government is a big part of that investment, that capital. And in Silicon Valley was built on the back of the Department of Defense and Lockheed Martin and all the spin-offs of technology that came out of that. So investment is the number one thing. There's got to be capital and resources that an ecosystem can grow from. The second thing is the entrepreneurship piece. It's people and institutions who are willing to share their experience, to advise and coach and mentor, and provide the technical assistance for entrepreneurs. You're not born an entrepreneur. You may be born curious, and you may be born, a hard worker and a hustler or obsessed with a particular problem. But how to do your bookkeeping and your accounting and to manage a budget, how you build a team or put together an exit plan and all that. That takes experience in coaching. So entrepreneurship is the second part. You got to have mentors, coaches, and institutions like the Long Beach Accelerator that we built in Long Beach to really capitalize on that investment in that capital. And then the third thing is community. People have to give more than they take. Nothing, no successful ecosystem or economy will grow, thrive, or sustain unless people are always giving more than they take from it and leaving it better than they found it. And those are really, really foundational principles of both democracy, our way of life here in America, as well as capitalism. You can't just cannibalize and take and then export those funds or export those resources. It's the tragedy of the commons, right?
Mhm.
Self-interest on the short term leads to scarcity. But if everybody believes that they're going to leave, the commons a little bit better with a little bit more grass for the next farmer to come along with their cows, you can develop a really dense and successful ecosystem.
That's amazing. I'm so glad to have you on the show because you have such a broad perspective in terms of just how we can all create an ecosystem with great leadership, meaning through people, through capital, and through these communities. And oftentimes, when I speak to investors, they don't have the type of unique perspective that you do that's focused on all those three pillars that you just mentioned. So I think that that's a catalyst for growth. Speaking of growth and scalability, and as it relates to people, in your perspective, what's the secret to identifying and developing the kinds of people or leaders or founders, in your case, who can drive both innovation and impact?
Oh yeah. I will say from I'm a work in progress. I'm early on. I'm in the seed round right now for being a leader and
Mhm.
trying to get to that growth round. First and foremost, it's just an obsession with a particular problem or a particular discipline, whether it's art or science or robotics or space. We look for first and foremost somebody who's absolutely just obsessed with a problem from the day they were born.
Mhm.
How did they make that music? How did they build that iPhone? They really do. We see it in people that are going to go the distance and they're going to struggle through the the journey. It's going to get difficult at times, but that passion and that obsession is going to drive them to keep trying. I think number
Mhm.
two is that they are coachable, that they're constant learners, and that their ego kind of takes a second seat in the car to any resource that will help them solve that problem.
Mhm.
You know,
Right.
you know these people. They are coachable. They are
Yes.
responsive. They see opportunity and they show up. They're never too important or too, successful to show up. And they're always looking for another resource, another team member, another way that they can advance their mission. And then I think the final thing, for these entrepreneurs, to go that distance is that they really are willing ultimately to work on a team and to be
Mhm.
collaborative. So they know at the time when they need to bring somebody on to maybe even be the CEO and to get out of the
Mhm.
way of that CEO that can take it to the next level. And they're willing to pivot. They're not just so beholden to their own idea that they're not willing to take another person's idea or to partner up with other team members. So those three things are a start. Now, when it comes to the business itself, we underwrite investments all the time, and we're looking for a product market fit. We call it traction, where they've found a service or a good, a product that somebody is willing to buy. That's a amazing breakthrough, right? And that's called product market fit. Somebody's willing to pay for, a particular solution, and then they're able to establish traction, which means a business model that leads to more customers, more and growth. So I think those three things that I talked about at the beginning, they seem
Mhm.
sometimes not as exciting and they're hard, but they
Mhm.
generally are the things that lead to that long overcoming the challenges in the short term.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And thank you so much for sharing. It, when I think about my leadership journey and how I've evolved through time, you mentioned that they have to be coachable. And it was only through my ability to lay down my ego and listen to different views and perspectives that was able to help me amplify my leadership skills versus having my ego in the way. And
Yeah,
I'm approaching 40 this year, and I've acquired more wisdom, and my ego has taken the back seat. And as I've coached more and more leaders through my own practice, I'm beginning to
yeah,
realize that a lot of them have blind spots, and part of it has to do with their ego. You might have heard the saying that great leaders are those that are lifelong learners, and
yeah,
lifelong learners are coachable, right? They're
yeah,
continuing to improve their skills, their abilities, their knowledge, and they're always curious. They don't have to be the smartest or want to be the smartest person in the room. They surround themselves with the smartest people,
yeah,
so that they can learn from them, right? And
yeah,
that's how they become the catalyst for people development.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, and you made a good point that we as a venture capital investor, let's just we're seed and pre-seed. We do raise special purpose vehicles for growth rounds and things like that, but we're really
Mhm.
focused on the seed round and then helping them into that growth capital they need. Um, so when you see a founder who doesn't want to give up any equity, we get
Mhm.
nervous, right? Because we
Right.
want you, as human beings, we're in a much better situation in life when other people take ownership of us, right?
Hmm.
And it's the same thing with our companies. When we have good people who, want to take ownership, want to take equity in us, right? That's a
Hmm.
really good sign because they want to be a part of our journey or they believe in us, right? And I would say the same thing, on the reverse. If we see a founder that doesn't have isn't willing to give up equity, not willing to give up ownership, to bring other people in on board, and they don't have other team members that 2, 3, 5 years that have been willing to stick around and work with them. It's a proxy for a very basic underwriting standard that we use socially, but we
Hmm.
also use that for investment. We know that, hey, look, money is just a kind of a proxy for value, right? Am I willing to take risk? And,
Hmm.
risk has a premium. I need a bit higher interest rate if you're a riskier bet at an earlier stage. But when we see those things, when we see people who are coachable, who are hungry to bring on advisors and mentors and willing to give up equity because they know, you know, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you really want to go along, you go
Hmm.
together, right? That
Right.
famous adage that like it really is true, not just socially. It's true from an investment standpoint. So you hit it on the head. That's a proxy. If nobody wants to stick around and you're not able to cultivate, team members, co-founders, or willing to give away some equity, for others to take ownership of you, that's also a real strong proxy for your leadership and ultimately your ability to succeed over the long term.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you definitely hit the points there. I think as I transition, I'm actually in this phase in my business. It's been about 3.5 years, actually approaching 4 years now. That I'm looking to pull in members of the C-suite. And
Mhm.
initially, I was hesitant because this was my baby, and I've
Yeah.
invested my blood, sweat, and tear to grow this business, right?
Mhm.
Um, Now having to let go some of those um, tasks that are taking too much of my time that I could
Yeah.
delegate to other people so it could free up my time to focus on what I'm truly passionate about, which is to coach people from
Mhm.
a leadership perspective. Whereas, in hiring like a CMO to market the content, to do the content and such, like that's a different shift in mindset. And so it's important for first-time founders and entrepreneurs to continue to think about evolving their leadership journey, right? And one of the things that I've been coaching my clients is do not be attached to a certain thing, place, or people, because of the attachment that often leads to disappointment, and attachment leads to expectations, which often leads to disappointment, right? And so um I like to say build a business that you're passionate about, that's tied to your purpose and you're excited about it, but also be detached by that thing, right? Because like what's that dating hinge? Is it Hinge, the dating app? Is one of their mission was to match people so they can go out of business. That's their mission, right? So it's almost that notion of like build a company to solve a problem, hoping that there wouldn't be a problem to solve because of this company, and the company won't exist, right? So at the end of the day, it's really about impact. It's about being of service to people, to communities. And so, but when founders are reluctant to give up some of their equity to bring in more people, then it has more to do with them, right? Which is the ego at play, than it has to do with the impact that they want to make in the world, right? And so, I see you nodding a lot. So I don't know if you
Yeah,
have
of
any
course.
thoughts to that or insights.
Yeah, yeah. So I think you're describing that journey toward, maturity as a leader, maturity as a founder. And it's very, I think you're hitting on something else that's really important is that, you're willing, to be honest. And what did Socrates say? The unexamined life is not worth living, and wisest is he who knows he does not know. I think
Mm,
that kind of concept is actually, it ripples through all great religions. It
mhm,
ripples through all great philosophical systems. It also ripples, it translates not just into kind of setting the ego aside for the mission. Is saying that the mission is more important than, the individual recognition or the individual benefits. I think, also interdependence, this idea that, we really are the product of the intersection of many, many different relationships and, ultimately being part of a community, having a community of people with different skill sets, being a part of a community that has, that has different perspectives. can actually make us much stronger. So it's like that Confucian idea that there's this intersection of relationships that when we strengthen those around us and we involve them in that mission because we believe so much in the mission over self, we kind of disappear into it, right? And
Right.
and we begin to lead sometimes from behind, or we start to empower others to step into those roles because they've been they're uniquely equipped for that particular challenge or that particular time. So it is a great superpower of leadership, is not the genius with a million followers, right? We
Mhm.
have that in our society right now, where it's being
Mhm.
very much, I think, our youth, especially our young men, are being convinced by a lot of our national leaders and otherwise that that is, a path. It's not, and it's never
Mhm.
been the path toward both success in the long term on the individual and side, but also from the societal perspective. So I think you're
Mhm.
hitting on it, and I think that's very much the journey that we're all on, and we're none of us are good at it. I'll put it that way. We've got to just keep working at it, and no matter what I do, I get into something new, I revert to some of my, less mature tendencies. But your honesty, your self-reflection, your willingness to admit your listeners will benefit more from that.
Mhm.
That's where you'll lead greatest, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that because some of my listeners are first time founders, they're looking for direction, and some of these are men who are looking for mentors and role models as well too. And so how do you uh, cultivate the space where entrepreneurs can really build community and support each other, and that knowing that they're not doing this alone, that there are people there to back them up, which is why Sunstone exists, is to help them connect them to the
Mhm.
right people. Now let's step back a little bit about Sunstone. So, in terms
Mhm.
of the public and private synergy, you've obviously built a career at the intersection of public and private sectors. How do you see public-private partnerships shaping the next decade of inclusive economic growth, factoring in AI?
Yeah, yeah. So let's start with a kind of just a 101 on economic development. So I spent 20 years in the city of Long Beach. I spent a couple years as a teacher before that. So, my expertise is really in the public sector, understanding how we can help to strengthen communities through economic development. So economic development is three main things. It's workforce development. You've got to have strong, skilled workers to power business development because businesses they solve problems, they provide services, they create economic activity, and they provide employment that are important for people. To be able to buy housing and healthcare and all those things. And then you have real estate development. So business, workforce, and real estate development are the three areas that really kind of underwrite or provide the foundation of any economy. America now at roughly $30 trillion GDP, and California specifically at $4 trillion of GDP, are massive economies, the biggest on the planet, the biggest in the history of the world. And what people don't necessarily realize is that, the government is the biggest investor. The government, the federal government of the United States of America will probably spend somewhere around $6 to $8 trillion this year. So it's the biggest, investor in the economy. And where it spends that money matters, whether it's in, transportation, energy, healthcare, defense, social services. They are the biggest private investor, venture capital investor, public investor. They're also a consumer products. So they don't just, pay money to research and develop and deliver things, but the government also is a consumer of those services and those products. And, if you think about the wealthiest men on the planet and the wealthiest women on the planet and the biggest companies on the planet, if you go back to who their customers are, I can think of one guy right now who has over $1 trillion, and all of his companies were developed to provide services to government. Still
Hmm.
are. Right? Why? Because the United States federal government is the biggest investor, biggest consumer, and drives economic transitions. Really is the biggest investor in emerging industries. So I wanted to point that out because oftentimes when I'm on a panel, people will say, "Okay, where's the economy going? Is it AI or is it, aerospace or is it energy or is whatever?" And I'll ask them, I'll say, well, have you looked at the federal, the budget of the federal government of the United States of America?
Hmm.
That is a menu of where the markets are going, by and large,
Hmm.
because they also can then print money. They can set
Hmm.
interest rates. So the government really does drive the economy in America by far. And it partners with the private sector. So it puts out money through grants, through contracts, to influence behavior of the private sector and businesses. Entrepreneurs are going after that money, either directly or indirectly, and they may not even know it.
Hmm.
Um, but also, what it does is it then takes money away through taxing, right, to keep inflation down. It wants to burn some of that capital, that excess capital, so that prices don't, get too high or there's too much money in the system. And so it really is trying to influence people's behavior, the economy's behavior, and the private sector's behavior. So I wanted just to give that little background that it's about, jobs, workforce, business, and real estate development, and the government, the federal government, the state government, and even your local governments, your cities and counties. They're the ones that are trying to really influence the behavior in productive ways to drive the economy through putting money out there and taking money away. So that's why a public-private partnership and understanding how the private sector interacts with the public sector, the education sector, and then the nonprofit sector, to drive economic growth. That's what public-private partnership is, and that's what Sunstone does best.
That's amazing. Now, you mentioned education nonprofit. So how
Mhm.
does those two entities tie into the inclusive economic growth? Because
Yeah.
when we think of nonprofit, they're not in the business of making money. I mean, they're providing services, right? So like, are they there to provide resources to people that are in need of support? Like what's your
Yeah.
lens
Yeah,
on
so a nonprofit is still a private organization, right? It's not a government organization. And government oftentimes will put grants out or fund
mm,
nonprofit organizations to provide services. So they really are an enterprise. They're a fundraising enterprise. They have to generate
mm,
enough resources either through philanthropy, government grants, or fee for service, and that's consistent with the tax code. That's what they are.
mhm,
They're
mhm.
constantly fundraising. Nonprofits,
Yeah.
but they get to select their mission. This is what's different.
Mm,
They get to select a very specific mission or set of missions that they, choose to focus on because they're passionate about. And
mhm,
unlike, city or state or federal government that has to deal with everything, usually has to deal with all the people and services that you can't make money doing.
mhm,
Government is really the only true nonprofit organization, but
mhm,
private nonprofits, they have to make money to pay the bills, to pay their staff, to pay their salaries, and they can actually be very, very big, very, very big organizations. So setting that aside, nonprofits are a very important part of the economy. So you've got public sector, government, public universities and schools and transit agencies and public utilities to deliver water and energy and public safety, police departments and fire departments. Um, and then you have the private sector, which generally gets paid by either private organizations, individuals, or the government to deliver goods and services. The nonprofit sector is considered the private nonprofit sector, but they just focus on usually a mission of what's called public benefit. So they don't have to pay taxes if they're doing things that provide public benefit. And
mhm,
because they're usually hyper focused, they can become experts in something. So whether it's housing or homeless services or even healthcare or social services, whereas a government like a city has to be very generalist and broad and cover whatever problem exists, these nonprofits can become hyper nimble and hyper innovative and hyper flexible, when it comes to dealing with the specialization. So think of it that way, that we as government and even the private sector will give money to nonprofit causes and missions because they're hyper focused and they can develop expertise because they can choose their mission, they can choose their customer, and they can get really, really good at that thing. But that's really where they differentiate. And then
Right.
we know they have to do it for public benefit if they want to be tax exempt, which
Mhm.
also is part of their business plan.
Mhm.
Not paying taxes is a good thing, especially buying property and not having, sometimes they have to pay a possessory interest in that land, but they can do things in real estate and business development without having to pay taxes. So just, critical of critical importance, but playing a very specific role in the economy.
Wow, that's like a knowledge bomb right there. Incredible knowledge. I mean I know that nonprofits don't pay taxes as long as they're
Yeah.
of service to the economy, but that's as far as my my knowledge goes when it comes
Mhm.
to nonprofit. And you're right. Like I've been involved in several nonprofits myself, volunteering, providing services to their constituents.
Mhm.
And so it's really mission driven, as you say, and they're hyper
Yeah.
focused on the types of people they serve. So that makes complete sense. Um, so we talked a little bit about leadership, and I wanted to get your take. Um, as you know, you've been in public service, over 2 decades, and you're now leading an incredible organization, Sunstone. How has your definition of leadership evolved over time?
Yeah, I think it continues to evolve. But I think a leader is someone who helps people, organizations, communities do the hard things that they need to do,
Mhm.
but they're not able to do on their own. And that's a weird definition of leadership. I don't think it's common, but it's rife with conflict. Let me give you some examples. So, when you're a soccer coach, you have to help players with their mind, their body, and their spirit, right? You have to push their bodies. The muscles will actually tear if you're working, lifting enough weight, running farther than you've ever run before. It's going to tax the body, and it's going to push a person, an athlete, to do things that they wouldn't do on their own. They don't necessarily know what to do, but without being pushed to become the best that they absolutely can become, to do the things they need to do, but don't necessarily want to do or know how to do on their own. Let me give you an example in something maybe that everybody's been in the classroom, a teacher, um, helping that student do the things that they need to do, but that they don't necessarily want to do or can't do on their own. The homework, the study, but it's creating that vision, understanding that vision of what that student wants to become. They want to become let's just say they want to become a movie star. Well, there's going to be a lot of work involved in that. There's obviously the practice and there's obviously the study, but there's also understanding the path. Getting the right kinds of opportunities and being in the right place at the right time and getting the agents, the mentors, the coaches. Ultimately. Helping people do the things that they really need to do to get to the place that they want in life, but they're not able to do on their own. And you've had great teachers and coaches. In business, it's no different. I have to, unfortunately, as the CEO, I'm the chief executive officer. That's about execution. And execution, making sure that we understand the vision and the values of the company, where it needs to go. Sometimes we have to do the things that are hard and push people to work harder than they ever believed they could, to learn things they never knew they could, to do things at a level they never thought they could. So you have to be able to understand and communicate the vision so people understand it, to know why they're going to do all this hard work that they don't want to do. Because nobody wants to give up, staying up late and playing video games, or drinking that extra cocktail, or getting up early and going to the gym. I mean, all those things that we need to do to get to be the person or the company, or achieve the vision that we want for ourselves in life. That's what leaders are for. And so, that definition means that leaders are in service. of everybody else's, vision and mission. Leaders are in service of a mission, and leaders oftentimes have to execute. The CEO is the chief executive or responsible for execution of that vision. So it's hard work. It's not popular work.
Mhm.
In the long run, it's rewarding work.
Yeah, yeah. You probably have heard of Simon Sinek's TED Talk about the power of why
Yeah. Oh, why?
organizations, yeah, why organizations tend to stick around the long term versus organizations or companies that stick around in the short term. And he talks a
Hmm.
lot about having that why. Why do you do what you do every day? And the organizations that have done quite well in terms of motivating or influencing their employees' behaviors to do the things that they need to do to accomplish their mission have
Hmm.
crafted a why that is aligned with their employees. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's when you think from that perspective, it's alignment is
Hmm.
purposeful and it gets people excited, right? Because it
Yeah.
ties directly to work of fulfillment. Because
Yeah.
purpose it's not just about creating a purpose-driven organization. It's about creating a workplace where people feel not just happy, because happiness is a state of emotion, goes up and down, but to be fulfilled, knowing that the work that I do is making an impact in the world. And so um that's great. And the other I can't remember who said this, but in to your point about being of service to others is what great leaders do. There's a saying that goes, if service is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you, right? And so, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that quote has stuck around, since I first founded 10 years. It's still
Yeah.
around, and I truly believe that great leaders are of service. They take care of their people. They instill inspiration and power and make sure that they're being treated with respect and dignity in doing the work and being compensated as well as recognized for their
Hmm.
contribution to the work is what makes top talent or great employees stick around versus working for their direct competitor, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's sometimes it's okay when you help somebody, you help somebody find their purpose and they need to leave the company. They need to leave the
Hmm.
organization because they realize, hey, I got into, private equity or venture capital because I was young and I thought it was, my purpose. But I've since discovered my purpose and I need to
Hmm.
leave. Sometimes leaders do help people, leave the organization too. Good leaders oftentimes, it's just about as much, you know, um, being willing to help somebody become great and maybe take your job. Maybe, as
Yeah.
you said, solve the problem and so that you're not needed as much anymore in that community. And sometimes, helping a team member discover their purpose and realize that they need to go somewhere else to fulfill it. That's also always incredibly satisfying and fulfilling. And so, sometimes as leaders, if it becomes about, us accomplishing our goals,
Hmm.
we're going to continually be disappointed and
Hmm.
upset and feel, that somebody's let me down. I put all this time and energy into you and I was cultivating you and then you went off and you created your own company. That's one of the hardest things about being a parent, a good parent, is preparing kids. My two boys, they were walking
Hmm.
through here, preparing them to leave the home, preparing them
Hmm.
to cut the umbilical cord and go off and not need you as in the same way they did before. Coaches preparing a kid to maybe even get on a better team and leave you and have success without you. I mean, it's a really interesting, leadership is as much about making sure that we won't go back to that original discussion about founders and great founders.
Hmm.
It's about not caring who gets the credit because you're so committed to the mission.
Yeah.
It's very rare, and so I caution people. It's hard, but it is fulfilling,
Hmm.
and ultimately, you know, it's not always what we think in the way that it plays out. And every
Mhm.
day I'm up and down. I'm frustrated. I got to do all the same things, that everybody else does. So,
Mhm.
just if you can do anything, Kong, with your listeners, is prepare them for the difficult but fulfilling journey ahead, and make sure that they have their eye fixed, their vision is clear, that they're doing all this hard stuff over this long period of time, because the result of the world on the other side of that vision and that hard work is worth it.
Right. And part of that is surrounding themselves with people who support them, either as coaches or mentors, people they
Mhm.
look up to from a business perspective, to help them grow into becoming the type of leader that they're meant to be, or to
Yeah.
execute on the strategy to, achieve the mission of the organization, right?
Yeah.
Um, so with that, on that note, how do you identify um top movers and shakers? Do you have like a methodology? That does Sunstone have a methodology that you implement to identify the movers and shakers in this space, and how they go about addressing the future of work and talent in both public private lives?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So the short answer is yes. But let me just give you an example for the listeners so that they can just kind of see the way we do it. So we're building out our economic development and government entity called Sunstone Cities. So the Sunstone Investment Group has a couple of different divisions. We've got the private capital management, Sunstone Advisors. We've got Sunstone Community Fund, which does all our nonprofit work, and then we've got Sunstone Cities, which is engaged in government economic development. And over the last few years, we've invested in pitch competitions.
Mm,
So one of the things that we've done is, of course, we have our California State University CSU pitch competition. That's $200,000 a year of prize money, 23 campuses across the state. It comes down to just a few teams who compete for the prize money on one campus every year. And that's really exciting because we see that talent make its
mm.
way, running the gauntlet, sticking through, it's kind of like March Madness over a 6 month period. And we see those people stick with it and their passion. And then, they third party judges, they award, but we see talent through that. The USC Economic Development Challenge is another good example where I came out of USC Price School getting my master's of public administration. And I was great, just super grateful that Sunstone allowed us to do an annual economic development challenge there, where we bring these student leaders into cities as consultants and they help them with their economic development plans. Well, same thing, prize money at the end. These student teams, there's 7 competing this year. They'll go after, I think, $10,000 in prize money in April or May when the finals are. The last 3 years, we've hired a member of the winning team in each of the last 3 years. We hire them first as a fellow, 6 month gig. They get in, they work hard. We see the fact that they've already risen to the top. They've stuck with the challenge. They have a passion for it through that economic development challenge. The last 3 employees we've hired have come out of that economic development challenge. And I assume we'll find another one this year. But my point being that they don't know they're really interviewing for a job. They're just going after this passion for, local economic development, creating, jobs and economic opportunity for these communities. And then at the end of it, you see this passion and we then say, hey, well, we've got this fellowship. Are you guys interested? And then we see who applies. And they come on board, Ryan, Giselle, Hannah, like I can name them. They're in our company now.
Mm, yeah.
And what's interesting is that they all have incredibly different backgrounds, incredibly
Mhm.
different backgrounds. They're women, they're young men, they're coming from, Southern California, Northern California, they're coming from communities of color, they're coming from first generation, college families. That's not what we're looking for. It's just what emerges.
Wow, that's
And
incredible.
yeah, so the funny thing is that, people, I don't do the interviews anymore. I have to approve hiring, but I let the younger team who's going to supervise these employees, I say, you got to find people that are going to keep up with you, that are going to work with
Right.
you and be, good team members and they're going to have good chemistry. And they say, well, what's the one question you want us to ask in the interviews? The only question that I ask in the interviews is about who their role model is.
Mm,
Because, I've learned over 20 years of hiring that if somebody tells you about their grandmother or their uncle or their father or some sort of crazy, story of struggle that they've
mhm.
overcome, then I know I can work with this person, over the
Yeah,
long run because they don't have to live up to John Keisler or even Sunstone's mission of enriching communities through investment and economic development. They have to live up to a standard of expectations that goes back potentially generations in their own
yeah.
family. So my point being, there's only one question that I ask. The team has to do the harder part of recruitment and finding good candidates who are technically proficient and have good, educational backgrounds. But the one question I want them to answer is about who their role model is. And
Mhm.
generally that will give you a lot of insight into who's
Mhm.
going to be not just a great team member, but potentially a great leader.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I love that you've been able to tie some sort of personal aspect of themselves to the role that they'll be in, so
Yeah,
that there's a sense of alignment, right?
yeah,
And as you know, and I know, majority of Americans are dissatisfied with their work. Most of them, work just because it provides them a paycheck that
yeah,
provides for the essentials. But beyond that, they're not truly fulfilled. And so the work that I do,
yeah,
is to help coach more people to become more fulfilled through their work. And part of
yeah,
that has to do with alignment. So when you're asking these questions that are thought provoking, that are directly tied to some sort of aspect of their lives, it makes them
yeah,
think, well, is this job in alignment with my personal values, the history
yeah,
of my family, my people, right? And I'm
yeah,
glad that you mentioned about first generation because a little bit of my background, I'm actually first generation of my family go to college.
yeah,
Um, and I think
yeah,
I might have mentioned this to you during our intro call. Um, my parents are political refugees of the Vietnam War. And
yeah,
so, it was only through education that both my parents thought that it would provide economic certainty for me.
yeah,
And to
yeah,
an extent, they are correct.
hmm,
I the reason why I pursue entrepreneurship, so it gives me the freedom to choose how I want to make the kind of impact that I want for the world,
yeah,
and also to
yeah,
honor my parents who sacrificed so much to raise us 12 kids. Like
yeah,
we grew up poor. Like I
oh yeah,
remember living in an apartment of, like a one bedroom apartment with seven, eight of us,
yeah,
one bathroom, and it was very difficult. It was a very challenging time. And so what I do today is really to honor the sacrifices that my parents have made for us and also to leave a
yeah,
legacy. And when I think about a company that can help me align with that, it's difficult. I haven't really found one, and so that's the
yeah,
reason why I chose entrepreneurship, right? I wish I could have met you maybe 10 years ago. I would have been a perfect employee for you. um so I know we're about that time. What advice would you give my listeners? Things that I haven't asked that you would like to mention.
yeah. I think first and foremost is just spending some time to think about what you want to leave behind. I think that, life goes fast and we climb this mountain, we're trying to do the things that we see other people doing, and it can become just so incredibly consuming on a day-to-day basis. But take a moment, to think about that. You're on your deathbed, you're looking back at your life. What are you leaving behind that you would just your heart would be warm? It was a life worth living. So take some time to do that. I think that's going to help you then define your purpose. And that's going to help you with every engagement with other people and with job interviews, or if you're self-employed as an entrepreneur, the mission and purpose of your company, your clients will see it. But having, I think spending some time doing that, that will come through. I think then the other thing to think about is, most of our time when we are young in our careers, is really serving and supporting others. It really is, and it's a good thing. The idea that if we can make other people look great, make your boss look great, make your colleagues look great, there's going to be a time when you need to get some credit for some stuff. And that time will come. But especially in the first few years when you're out there, even your job as an entrepreneur, make your customers and your clients look good. Make them feel
Mhm.
good and look good. Your best customer is always your existing customer. So, knowing beginning with an end in mind, I think, you can read Stephen Covey and the Seven
Yep.
Habits. I think reflecting on what you're going to leave behind, and then establishing your purpose, and then ultimately being useful to other people, making other people look good. I think you'll find that not only is it fun and rewarding, you will start to promote really quickly, because people will want to pull you into important deals. They'll want to pull you into important meetings in the room where it happened, right? Because they know that you're going to come away and you're going to think about how you can add value. And the last thing is always just leave it better than you found it. If it's a long journey sometimes, like I said, at the end of it, it'll look like it went fast, but on a day-to-day basis, it feels long, right? So don't miss the moments. Be mindful that every moment, our lives are a collection of millions of moments. And so make those moments great by, really trying to leave every moment a little bit better than you found it, the people, the place, because that will add up. And that will add up to not only, you fulfilling your purpose, it will not only add up to that moment on your deathbed when your heart is warm, and hopefully that family and those friends are around you. But also you'll be surprised, but it will lead to your business and professional success.
Wow, that's incredible. That's a mic drop moment.
I don't know
John,
about.
this you're incredible. Thank you so much for creating a company that is and will continue to do so much for the community and in the entities that rely on you and for your leadership as well. And I'm fortunate to know you, to come across your team, and I'm very excited about what lies ahead for both of us. If somebody wants to connect with you, where can they find you through this podcast?
Oh, absolutely. So it's easy to find me on LinkedIn. A lot of our events, where you can come meet me in person, but meet our team. If you're an entrepreneur, the Sunstone Venture and Innovation Center, SVIC, we do events every Friday. Most weeks we do two or three events. We do a lot of them every Friday on our P3 strategy series. You can come in and meet government officials, and you can meet our team members there at Airport Towers in Irvine, right by John Wayne Airport. But we've got events. We did CES out in Las Vegas. We're going up to the Bay Area next week. So we do get out there, but follow us on LinkedIn, because then you'll be able to sign up for the alerts about all the events that are going on. Because investment, entrepreneurship, and community is an in-person mission, and that is an in-person kind of activity. So please reach out, get on our lists, and come see us.
Thank you, John. Folks, there you have it. I encourage you to reach out to John to learn more about his work. And until then, thank you so much, you all, for listening.